Hello, I'm Jeff Morgan. You are listening to The Shadow of Tartarus, the first book in the Tartarus series. This is an authorized audio recording. If you're interested in the following story, please like and subscribe to my channel. A full list of my books are available on Amazon Kindle. Thank you and enjoy.
Chapter 2. The Desert Job. Arthur Waite's eyes fluttered open, his breathing shallow and rapid. His mind raced, still tethered to the dream that had gripped him. In the fog between sleep and waking, the image of the UFO hovered more clearly than when he'd first seen it on the road the night before. He had been winding his truck through the desert when the peculiar object appeared in the night sky. It was an enormous metallic disk, floating silently above the horizon. In his fevered dream state, the object was close and sharp. The surface of the craft gleamed under a pale light. Its edges were smooth and almost unnatural. Through the haze of the craft's window, he caught a glimpse of occupants. They were slender, skeletal-like figures with gray skin stretched tightly over their bones. Their heads were large and disproportionate to their bodies. Their eyes, a greasy black, pierced through the air and into his mind. The dream shifted. He was back at the hangar, standing inside. Outside, the sound of banging rang out in the distance. Bang, bang, bang. A frantic, rhythmic knocking resonated from all around. Over and over and over, it repeated relentlessly, each strike growing louder and more urgent. Arthur felt his heart race as he turned toward the door. The striking grew faster and more insistent. Bang, bang, bang. It wasn't just a knock. It was the pounding of something, someone coming to take him. Men in black, a voice whispered in his mind. They were coming for him. Suddenly, a thunderous noise penetrated his skull and ripped him from the dream. His heart hammered in his chest. The echoes of the knocking were still reverberating in his ears. His eyes did their best to focus on the hangar's rusted beams above. He needed some time to reorient himself to reality. The sweltering southern Nevada heat had crept into the hangar before the sun even hit its peak. Drenched in sweat and gasping for air, Arthur just laid there. The booming sound of panicked knocking came again and broke through the residual stupor of his nightmare. He remained motionless, trying to shake off the grogginess. The unrelenting blows became increasingly frantic, pounding and pounding on the hangar door. This wasn't the casual knock of a visitor. Rather, it was a desperate banging that demanded immediate attention. Arthur groaned and swung his legs off the cot. He rubbed his face and stumbled toward the source of the noise. He slid back the heavy bolt on the hangar door. Bracing himself for the blinding sunlight, he heaved the door open. On the other side of the door stood an elderly man. He was disheveled and weathered. His wild gray hair and wiry frame gave him the appearance of someone who had spent too much time chasing windmills. His clothes were threadbare and mismatched, a mix of styles that might have been fashionable 2 decades ago. "You're the helicopter pilot?" the man asked sharply, urgently. Arthur blinked, still groggy. "Yeah, I'm Arthur Waite." Stepping closer, the old man said, "I need your helicopter," his tone leaving no room for argument. Arthur's curiosity flared. Jobs had been few and far between lately, and he was desperate enough to entertain almost anything. He pushed the door open wider and gestured toward the hulking one Huey parked in the center of the hangar. Stepping aside, Arthur said, "Come on in." The man's eyes lit up as they landed on the helicopter. He took a few steps inside, his gaze darting between the aircraft and Arthur. "Does it fly?" Arthur bristled at the question. "Of course it flies. What do you need it for?" The man turned to face him fully. "My name is Dr. Miles Murden. I'm an engineer. I need to conduct a scientific experiment in a remote location. The area is about 15 miles east of the Nellis Air Force Base test range." Arthur folded his arms. "You're aware that's likely restricted airspace, right? Maybe you'd prefer a scenic tour of Lake Mead instead." "No." Murden's face hardened. "It has to be this evening. The experiment will be conducted shortly after dark. I want you to put down in the Desert National Wildlife Range. I think you could fly north up State Road 93 and head northwest to Coyote Springs. I think that's about 75, maybe 80 miles. The insistence in the man's voice piqued Arthur's interest. I've been up that way before. What kind of equipment are we talking about? He asked, the pilot in him already planning the load. Murden nodded toward his old vehicle parked outside. Let me show you. Arthur followed him to the car. Murden opened the back door to reveal a modest amount of gear, a military-style bag likely to contain a 40-foot antenna mast, two sturdy boxes labeled with faded stencils indicating electronics and cables, and a small generator. Arthur examined the load with an experienced eye. Doesn't look like more than a couple £100, he said. That's right, Murden confirmed. Arthur leaned back against the car, crossing his arms. You said you want to do this tonight? Murden didn't hesitate. Tonight. It's critical that the experiment takes place shortly after dark. Arthur pretended to think it over. I don't know. I've got a lot on my plate today. Murden's eyes narrowed. I'll pay you $2,000, and I'll cover your fuel. Arthur's eyebrows shot up. That was more money than he'd made at one job in months. Murden, sensing some reticence, added, 1,000 now, and the rest when the job's done. Arthur's mind raced. He didn't need much convincing, but he didn't want to appear too eager either. Finally, he extended his hand. You've got a deal. The two men shook hands, a relic from a time when a handshake was as binding as any contract. Murden reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash, counting out $1,000 in crisp bills. I'll be back at 6 p.m., he said. Then the doctor climbed into his car and drove off. Arthur stood in the hangar doorway with the cash in his hand. He watched Murden's car disappear down the road. The rest of the day stretched out before him, and he had plenty to do. First, he needed to buy fuel for the Huey and pay his overdue rent on the hangar. Then there was the matter of cleaning himself up and grabbing a decent meal, something he hadn't had in over 24 hours. The airport office was a short walk from the hangar. Arthur stepped inside, and he was greeted by the familiar sight of Heidi, the airport manager. She sat behind the counter, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, scanning through a thick logbook of operations. Born and raised in a small town along the Rhine near Mainz, Germany, Heidi had spent much of her life around aviation. As a young woman, she had met and fallen in love with an American airman stationed in Germany. They married. The two had built a life together, raising children as they moved from base to base. For 20 years, she worked in Air Force Base management, both in Germany and the United States. Their last station was Nellis Air Force Base. Things changed for her after arriving in Nevada. Divorced at 44, she was forced to start over in Las Vegas. She managed this small airport and carved out a life for herself. It wasn't easy, but Heidi had never been the type to wallow in regret. She ran a tight ship, and she expected the same from everyone else, including Arthur Waite. She glanced up as he walked in, her expression sharpening. Arthur Waite, as I live and breathe, she said, setting her pen down. Do you have my money, or is this another next-time visit? Arthur smirked, pulling the wad of cash from his pocket and waved it playfully. I've got this month's rent, next month's too, and enough to top off the Huey. Her eyebrows lifted in genuine surprise. Well, someone's either landed a job or got very lucky at the tables last night. Arthur chuckled. Job. The good kind, too. Heidi took the money and counted it with efficiency before scribbling a receipt. As she handed it to him, she let her gaze linger on him for just a moment longer than necessary. Arthur was, without question, a striking man, rugged, strong, and carrying an air of mystery. If she were a few years younger, she might have entertained the idea of something more. But Arthur was only 30, and she had no illusions about starting anything with a younger man, certainly not one as complicated as him. Still, that didn't mean she didn't enjoy their interactions. Don't spend it all in one place, she said with a wink, slipping the money into the register. Arthur grinned. No promises. Heidi watched him for a moment as he turned to leave, shaking her head slightly. The man had charm, that was certain. But there was something else beneath the surface, something wounded and guarded. She had spent years around military men, and she knew the look of someone carrying ghosts. Take care of yourself. Wait, she added before he walked out the door. Arthur simply gave a small wave over his shoulder, stepping back into the heat of the Nevada sun. The diner was just down the road from the airport. It was a small, old-fashioned place with faded red, vinyl booths, and the pervasive scent of fried bacon and coffee. As Arthur stepped inside, the bell over the door jingled. Kate appeared from behind the counter carrying a fresh pot of coffee. Kate was the same age as Arthur but looked younger in certain ways. She had full cheeks, and the way she always seemed slightly flustered gave her the air of a teenager. She was quite tall with a lanky frame, her limbs long and lean. She had a strange and rather awkward grace about her. Her thick, wavy brown hair was cut at her shoulders. It was a bit wild and untamed and always looked like it needed to be combed. She was distinctive looking, certainly, but she had a warm and genuine smile. She wasn't shy exactly, but she had a way of second-guessing herself. It showed in the way she spoke, always careful, always on the edge of embarrassment. When she saw Arthur, her face lit up, but she quickly caught herself being more enthusiastic than made her comfortable, so she looked down in order to avoid eye contact. She set the coffee pot back on the burner. "Haven't seen you in a few days," she said, grabbing a menu and heading toward his booth. Arthur grinned as he slid into the seat. "Been busy." Kate placed the menu in front of him, even though she knew he probably wouldn't look at it. "You look hungry," she added. "I'll take the biggest breakfast you've got." Kate laughed, her cheeks flushed with the faintest shade of pink. "I figured as much." As she scribbled down the order, she hesitated for just a second before saying, "You know, you really should take better care of yourself." Arthur glanced up, amused. "I know." She bit her lip, already regretting the words. I mean, you always come in here looking like you haven't slept, or like you've been living off black coffee and bad luck." Arthur chuckled. "That's about right." Kate's blush deepened. She always felt like an idiot when she tried to say anything remotely personal. The truth was, she often thought about what it would be like to have a nice guy like Arthur. She just wasn't the kind of woman who knew how to be bold. Just the thought of putting herself out there made her stomach twist. She thought Arthur was oblivious. Why would a man notice her? Arthur leaned back in his seat. "Maybe I do need someone to take care of me," he said lightly. Kate's eyes widened. She stammered, her face burning now. Arthur laughed, shaking his head. "Relax, Kate. Just teasing you." She let out a nervous little chuckle, then quickly turned away before she made an even bigger fool of herself. As she walked back toward the kitchen, she scolded herself for being so easily flustered. He's just a guy? A handsome, kind, frustratingly charming guy, but still just a guy. When it was ready, she composed herself and brought his food out to him. She tried to be sophisticated, as she supposed this sort of guy would like. "I hope you find your food satisfactory," she said. Arthur nearly choked on his coffee. After breakfast, Arthur headed to the gym. It was a familiar refuge where he could clear his mind and keep his body honed. The place was owned by Tom, a retired Army first sergeant who had been like a father figure to Arthur since he left the military. Tom, who Arthur always called Top, had spent years as a helicopter crew chief and understood the struggles of transitioning out of the service. Top had a gruff exterior but a heart of gold. He let Arthur use the gym facilities for free, knowing the younger man was down on his luck. More than that, though, Top respected Arthur's skill. Arthur had been a student of jiu-jitsu since the age of 16. What started as a way to keep himself disciplined had turned into something he excelled at. He competed all through college and earned his second-degree black belt before graduation. During his Army years, jiu-jitsu became more than a sport. It was a survival tool. It kept him focused and in control, even in the worst situations. Even though his life had taken some hard turns, Arthur still practiced regularly. He also taught a small jiu-jitsu class twice a week in the evenings at the gym. Top paid him a little for it, but Arthur mostly did it to stay in good form and to have some structure in his life. When he walked in, Top greeted him with his usual booming voice. "Wait, you look like you've been dragged through a sandstorm. What's the story today?" Arthur grinned. "Landed a job. Good money, too." Top raised an eyebrow. "No kidding? About time. When's the gig?" "Tonight," Arthur replied. "Figured I'd get a workout in, clean up, and kill some time here until then." Top clapped him on the back. "Good idea. Stick around and roll with some of the new guys. They need a real ass-kicking." Arthur chuckled. "Sure. I just can't get myself beat up before tonight." The next couple hours were spent in the gym's mat area, where Arthur ran drills with a few of the younger fighters. He moved with effortless control, his years of training evident in the way he flowed between positions. He let some of the newer guys get in a few good attempts. However, when he decided to shut them down, it was quick and decisive: a sweep, a choke, a joint lock that forced them to tap out in seconds. By the time he was done, Arthur felt better, looser, sharper, and more in control. After a quick shower, he washed a load of laundry. Then he sat back in the gym's lounge sipping a protein shake and watching a few guys hit the heavy bags. Top wandered over, arms crossed. "So, you gonna tell me what this job is?" Arthur gave a slow nod. "Just a flight. Some scientist wants a lift out past the test range." Top frowned. "Sounds sketchy." Arthur shrugged. "Probably is." Top sighed. "Just don't get yourself into something you can't get out of." Arthur chuckled. "Wouldn't be the first time." With that, he grabbed his bag and headed out, ready to face whatever the night had in store. Feeling restless and with a few hours still to kill, Arthur decided to visit the casino. The pull of blackjack was hard to resist, especially with cash in his pocket. Arthur didn't know the day crew very well. They were mostly new people. However, they were good to him, and by the time he left 3 hours later, he had doubled his money. The unexpected windfall left him in high spirits. "My luck's finally turning around," he said to himself. "Maybe tonight's job." Leaving the casino with a smile on his face and extra cash in his pocket, Arthur decided to make a quick stop at the grocery store before heading back to the hangar. It wasn't much of a detour, but he knew he couldn't put off feeding himself any longer. The last few days had been a blur of exhaustion and fast food. He didn't want to keep relying on cheap, greasy meals to keep himself going. The fluorescent lights of the store buzzed as he walked down the aisles, casually tossing things into his cart: a loaf of bread, a couple of cans of soup, a package of chicken breasts, some vegetables. He didn't have the luxury of planning ahead, but he could at least manage a few meals to get him through the next stretch. Arthur wasn't one for elaborate meals. His life was too unpredictable for anything more than basic cooking. He didn't see the point in buying ingredients for days when he rarely had time to cook more than a simple dinner and lunch. So he focused on what he could make in a pinch. Food he could fill up on. Food that was easy, quick, and could be made on a hot plate. When he reached the checkout, the cashier greeted him with a polite smile. Arthur handed over his cash and strolled out to the parking lot. He tossed the bags into the passenger seat of his truck. When he got back to the hangar, he briefly thought about how little time he actually spent in one place. Not even long enough to cook for himself. The fact that he never really had the chance to plan for more than the next couple of meals was just part of the life he'd fallen into. He wasn't the type to think too far ahead. Living in the moment was all he had. By 6 p.m., Arthur was standing beside the Huey, its tanks full and ready for the night's work. As promised, Murden arrived right on time, his car rattling to a stop just outside the hangar. He stepped out, carrying his equipment with a determined look on his face. Arthur helped him load the gear into the helicopter, securing everything tightly. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this job than Murden was letting on. But with $1,000 already in his pocket and another $1,000 waiting at the end of the night, he decided not to press the issue. "Ready?" Murden asked as he climbed into the passenger seat. Arthur nodded. Let's get this done. As the rotors of the Huey began to spin, Arthur felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready for it.
The next chapter of this novel will be posted on my YouTube channel. My other books are available on Amazon Kindle. Thank you for listening.